Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button because once you step into this story, there's no turning back. What you're about to hear will change the way you think about freedom forever. It started on a cold November morning in Michigan, 2018. The gates of Haverstone Correctional Facility creaked open, releasing the first breath of winter and one man who didn't want to go. Raymond Holt had served 27 years for armed robbery and assault. By the time the paperwork cleared, the world outside had forgotten him. No one came to pick him up. No one wrote letters. He stepped out with a plastic bag of state-issued clothes and $20 in his pocket, but his eyes didn't carry relief. They carried fear. Guards said he'd been acting strange in the weeks leading up to his release. He'd stop mid-sentence during group therapy, staring at the locked doors with what one officer described as a look that said he'd rather stay behind them. Others laughed it off. Inmates sometimes grew comfortable with structure. But Raymond's unease was different. The night before his release, he told his cellmate, "Out there, I'm nobody. In here, I'm someone." 2 weeks later, that same cellmate saw Raymond again, back inside, wearing a new orange jumpsuit, face pale, expression blank. He'd walked into a downtown convenience store, smashed a bottle, and demanded the cashier call the police. When officers arrived, he surrendered quietly, hands already behind his back. No one could explain why a man who finally earned his freedom would throw it away so quickly. Detective Laura Meyers, a 20-year veteran with the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, took the case. Technically, there was no crime beyond vandalism and public disturbance, but something about Raymond's eyes unsettled her. They weren't the eyes of a man angry or desperate. They were calm, almost content. "I just wanted to come home," he told her during interrogation. "You don't get it, detective. Out there, everything's too loud, too fast, too empty." The psychologist assigned to evaluate him, Dr. Ellis, called it institutional syndrome, when long-term inmates lose the ability to cope with freedom. But Laura sensed there was more. Raymond didn't just fear the outside world. He seemed to be running from it. A few days later, a pattern began to emerge. Another inmate, Thomas Riker, same facility, similar sentence, was arrested for deliberately violating parole. He'd been out only a month. He, too, had said something chilling before his arrest. "It's safer in there." By January, 3 more men from Haverstone had reoffended within weeks of release, all returning to prison without resistance. The media barely noticed, but Detective Meyers did. She began cross-checking files, patterns, and psychological reports. Every name she pulled had one detail in common. All of them had served under the supervision of Warden Charles Linton. Linton was a quiet man, known for running a disciplined but humane prison. No scandals, no abuse reports. Yet as Laura read deeper, she found irregularities, missing therapy notes, and signed discharge evaluations and sealed incident reports that should have been public. Then came a phone call from a retired guard, anonymously. The voice was raspy, nervous. "You're asking the wrong question, detective. Don't ask why they came back. Ask what they were leaving behind." The call disconnected before she could trace it. That night, Laura drove to Haverstone herself. The facility loomed on the horizon like a rusted fortress, its walls glowing faintly beneath the snow-covered floodlights. Inside, everything smelled like bleach and stale air. She requested access to old inmate counseling records, but the clerk hesitated, saying those files were restricted by warden's order. Something didn't add up. As she walked past the visitation room, she noticed a guard quietly talking to a man through the glass, an inmate with hollow cheeks and trembling hands. When she asked who he was, the guard said, "That's Holt's old cellmate. Been asking to see the warden every day." Laura's instincts screamed that this was the thread she needed to pull. The next morning, she arranged an interview with the inmate. His name was Marcus Lane, convicted of burglary, serving 15 years. He looked at her with eyes that hadn't seen sunlight in months. "You're here about Holt, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Why did he want to come back?" Marcus hesitated, glancing toward the door, voice dropping to a whisper. "Because out there he thought they'd find him." "Who's they?" But Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the floor and murmured, "Check the basement, detective." That's where it started. Laura frowned. What basement? He looked up, eyes wide. The one they don't list on the blueprints. Her blood ran cold. When she returned to the warden's office to ask about it, Linton gave a thin smile. "There's no basement here, detective. This is a correctional facility, not a house of secrets." But when she left the room, she noticed something strange. The blueprint framed on his wall had a small corner smudged out with correction fluid. And beneath that faint white mark was a faint label barely visible through the paper, Sublevel C. If you thought Chapter 1 was dark, you haven't seen anything yet. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. Detective Laura Meyers couldn't shake the image of that smudged blueprint. Sublevel C. It didn't appear in any official construction records. Not in state documents. Not even in the facility's architectural archives. Yet there it was, buried under correction fluid on the warden's wall. She spent the night combing through Haverstone's original blueprints, archived news clippings, and construction permits. Nothing. The only trace she found was a 1989 maintenance order referencing electrical repairs, lower sublevel. After that, the paper trail went dead. The next morning, Laura returned to the prison under the guise of conducting follow-up interviews. Her badge carried weight, but her eyes did the real work, scanning every hallway, every locked door. She noticed something odd. Between the laundry block and solitary wing, the hallway ended abruptly with a newly built concrete wall. Fresh paint. Too fresh. She casually asked the nearest correctional officer, "When was this section renovated?" He hesitated, scratching his neck. "About 2 years ago, ma'am. Old storage area. Unsafe structure. We sealed it up." "Who approved that?" "Warden Linton. He handles all internal maintenance personally." That answer lodged in her chest like a splinter. Later that afternoon, she pulled Marcus Lane from his cell again. His voice trembled as he spoke, eyes darting toward the guards. "You shouldn't be here. They don't like people asking about Sublevel C." "Who are they?" she pressed. "The ones who never left," he whispered. "The ones Linton kept." Her pulse quickened. Kept? For what? He leaned closer. "For testing." Before she could ask more, 2 guards entered and ended the session. Their timing felt too precise, as if someone had been listening. That night, Laura sat in her car across from Haverstone, watching the prison lights flicker. Around midnight, a delivery truck rolled up to the back gate. No markings, no plates. The driver flashed his ID to the guard, and the gate opened without hesitation. No paperwork. No inspection. She jotted down the time. 12:14 a.m. The next day, she confronted Linton directly. "Warden, I need to see the sealed section of your facility," she said. His expression remained calm, almost rehearsed. "There's nothing there but old wiring and water damage. Dangerous conditions." "I'll take responsibility." He smiled thinly. "Detective, I've been running this place for 20 years. You think I don't know every inch of it? There's no secret level. You're chasing ghosts." But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a faint, rust-colored stain near the edge of his desk drawer. She didn't mention it, but she noted it. 2 nights later, Laura made her move. She pulled strings through an old contact in the State Department of Corrections and arranged a routine safety inspection. With 2 uniformed officers, she re-entered the facility, carrying a flashlight and an uneasy gut. When they reached the blocked hallway, she ordered the concrete cover partially removed. The sound of chipping echoed down the empty corridor. Beneath the plaster and new cement, a steel door waited, its hinges rusted, its handles still intact. It wasn't supposed to exist. She pushed it open, the metal groaning in protest. A narrow staircase spiraled downward, vanishing into darkness. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, she found a long corridor, lined with old observation rooms, glass partitions, and restraints bolted to the floor. Dust covered everything, but faint footprints traced across the concrete, fresh ones. Inside one of the rooms, A table sat beneath a flickering bulb. Scattered papers lay across it, psychological evaluations, signed by Dr. Ellis Crane. Each report listed behavioral conditioning sessions for inmates who had trouble readjusting before release. The notes were clinical, detached, describing reinforcement techniques, fear thresholds, and identity isolation. At the bottom of every form was the same stamped signature, approved by Warden Charles Linton. Her stomach turned. These weren't rehabilitation studies. They were psychological experiments, testing how far inmates could be pushed before preferring imprisonment over freedom. She pulled out her phone and snapped photos of the documents. But then she heard it, a faint metallic clang from the hallway.
Someone was down there.
She turned off her flashlight and crouched behind the observation table, heart pounding. Footsteps echoed closer. A figure moved past the doorway, flashlight beams sweeping across the floor. Then a calm voice. "Detective Myers, you shouldn't be here." It was Linton. He stepped into the room, hands clasped behind his back. "You wouldn't understand," he said quietly. "They were broken when they came here. I gave them peace. A purpose. By turning them into experiments," she hissed. He smiled faintly.
"No."
"By helping them accept who they really are. Some men aren't meant for freedom, Detective. Out there, the world eats them alive. In here, I built them a home." She took a step back, hand on her weapon. "You're finished, Linton. These records will bury you." He shook his head slowly. "No, Detective. You'll never leave this place." Before she could react, the overhead lights snapped off. The room plunged into darkness. A sharp hiss filled the air, gas. She covered her mouth and ran toward the staircase, lungs burning. Behind her, Linton's voice echoed through the corridor. "You see, Myers, even freedom has a price." She barely made it up the stairs before blacking out against the cold concrete. When she woke hours later, daylight filtered through the cracks in the sealed wall. The other officers were gone. Her phone missing. But the steel door below was welded shut again. And Linton? Vanished. Later that day, the prison officially announced that Warden Linton had retired, effective immediately. No records. No forwarding address. The investigation was quietly closed. Yet when Laura reviewed the inmate logs one last time, she saw something chilling. Marcus Lane had been transferred to a new facility, but no destination listed. At the bottom of the page, written in neat handwriting, was a note that didn't belong. Sublevel C remains operational. If you've made it this far, you already know, some stories don't end when the camera stops rolling. But before we go deeper, hit that subscribe button because what happens next will haunt you long after the screen goes black. 3 weeks after Warden Linton's disappearance, Detective Laura Meyers was placed on administrative leave. The official reason: procedural misconduct during an internal investigation. The real reason? She'd uncovered something the Department of Corrections wanted buried. But Laura couldn't let it go. Not after what she'd seen. Not after that gas-filled basement, or the sight of those psychological conditioning reports. Every night, she replayed Linton's final words, "Some men aren't meant for freedom." She moved into a cheap motel outside Detroit, far from the noise, and started piecing everything together. Every inmate who had begged to return to prison, every early parole that ended in reoffense, every psychological report marked confidential. The deeper she dug, the clearer the pattern became. The experiments didn't end when the inmates were released. They were designed to make sure they couldn't live outside. Emails, faked parole evaluations, post-release surveillance logs, all pointing to one name that kept resurfacing: Dr. Ellis Crane. The same psychologist who'd signed every conditioning report. She managed to track him down to a small private mental health clinic in Ohio. The building was clean, modern, but quiet, too quiet. When she entered the waiting room, the receptionist hesitated before saying, "Dr. Crane isn't taking new patients." Laura flashed her badge. "He'll make time." Crane's office looked like something out of a pharmaceutical ad: certificates, leather chairs, soft jazz. But his eyes, when he looked up from his desk, were cold. Calculating. "Detective Myers, I was wondering when you'd find me." "You worked with Linton," she said. "You signed off on his experiments." He gave a faint smile. Experiments? That's such a cruel word. We were conducting rehabilitation research, a partnership with the state. These men volunteered. They volunteered because you broke them, she shot back. You trained them to fear freedom. Crane sighed, almost disappointed. You still think in terms of good and evil. You think prison is punishment. But for some, it's peace. We didn't force them to come back. We simply made sure they'd want to. Her stomach twisted. You conditioned human beings like lab rats. He leaned forward, his voice calm. You don't understand what it's like for men who've lost everything. Inmates with no homes, no families, no purpose. They crumble out there. Linton gave them identity. We gave them belonging. She glanced at the bookshelf. Dozens of files labeled with inmate numbers. One stood out. Case number 0421, Holt, Raymond. Her heart dropped. Raymond Holt, the man who started it all. She grabbed the folder and flipped it open. Inside were detailed progress logs. Stage 3 acceptance achieved. Subject demonstrates dependency on confinement. Post-release observation successful. At the bottom, a note dated the day before his release. Subject expresses paranoia regarding external surveillance. Claims they will find him. Authorization granted for field continuation. Laura looked up. Continuation? You were still monitoring them after release. Crane didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a button beneath his desk. A faint mechanical click sounded behind her, the office door locking shut. He stood, walking slowly toward her. You shouldn't have come alone, Detective. You think this was just one prison? One warden?
No.
This was a program, and you've just stepped into the middle of it. She drew her weapon. Open the door. Crane didn't flinch. If I do, they'll follow you too. The same way they followed Holt. The same way they followed every subject who tried to expose us. She fired a warning shot into the ceiling.
Now.
He raised his hands, smiling slightly. You really don't get it. You think you're free because you're on the outside. But freedom, it's just another kind of prison. And you're already inside. The moment she blinked, Crane reached for a syringe hidden in his sleeve. Instinct took over. She dodged, grabbed his wrist, and slammed him against the desk. The syringe rolled across the floor. Inside, the liquid shimmered faintly, marked only with the letters C13. Within minutes, sirens echoed outside. Local police stormed the building, responding to the gunfire. But when they entered the office, Crane was gone. The rear exit wide open, a trail of wet footprints leading into the snow. All that remained on the desk was a single file folder. It wasn't Holt's. It was hers. Subject: Meyers L. Observation initiated. Status: active. The walls closed in around her. Her hands trembled. She dropped the file and ran outside, scanning the street. Empty cars, flickering lights, a security camera turning slowly in her direction. Someone was watching. That night, Laura disappeared. No one at the department could reach her. Her motel room was found empty, door unlocked, badge and gun left neatly on the bed. The last thing on her phone was an unfinished message to her partner. They were never supposed to leave. The prison was never a place, it was the program. 6 months later, Haverstone Correctional Facility quietly reopened under a new name, the Crane Behavioral Institute. Its purpose? Reintegration therapy for repeat offenders. And its new warden? A man listed only as C. Linton Jr. They say some of the inmates there don't even try to escape anymore. They smile during roll call. They sleep peacefully. Because for them, prison isn't punishment. It's home. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because what's coming next will make you question who's really free.